The Indiana Dunes on Lake Michigan's South Shore hold a special place in the hearts and minds of people who live and visit there. The Indiana Dunes draw people who want to escape from the daily humdrum and commotion of life to convene with nature, play in the water, recreate, wildlife watch, bird watch, or paddle their kayak.
I like to say my spiritual home was the Indiana Dunes.
The Indiana Dunes are simply magnificent. It has a quietness. It's simply lovely.
You know, the dunes to me at that time, of course, as with most kids, a beach, splashing around in the water.
This year marks our 60th anniversary as an organization. We're one of Indiana's oldest environmental groups. And I love telling the story of our history because it's so tightly interwoven with the history of how Northwest Indiana developed and the pressures that were placed upon it and interests.
Chicagoans would come out here to enjoy and hike the dunes on the weekends. People like Jens Jensen, who helped found the Prairie Club, Stephen Mather, who was the father of the national parks, Henry Chandler Coles, who was known as the father of North American ecology through his studies of dune succession. There was also Frank Dudley, a famous dunes artist. They set the stage for the Save the Dunes to succeed. They inspired our founders. It is good to understand why these people love the dunes so we don't forget why the dunes are worth saving.
My father first came out to the Indiana Dunes before the South Shore was running and walk up and down the beach and through the dunes. And on one occasion he bumped into a man who turned out to be Jens Jensen, who was known as the Apostle of the Dunes, the famed landscape architect. Jens Jensen told him about the Saturday afternoon walking club, which became the Prairie Club of Chicago. So my father joined, was very active in those activities, and this was all before World War I. My father would stop at Dudley's cabin in the dunes periodically to visit, and we had some very nice times there. And it was very important to Dudley to depict the Indiana Dunes as they were. He wanted to tell people about the value of the Indiana Dunes and the importance of preserving them.
I think it's exciting to think about the energy and spark that was generated by the women who started the organization many, many years ago. So Dorothy Buell got engaged in the process through friends and colleagues of hers who were concerned about the Indiana Dunes, and they saw that this woman embodied both strength, humility, professionalism, respectfulness, in a way that they just knew would make her an incredibly effective leader of Save the Dunes.
And in June 1952, Save the Dunes held its first meeting at her house in Ogden Dunes.
Bear in mind, Save the Dunes was organized by women, and ultimately were wise enough to allow men in as well. But she was a dramatist. She knew her Shakespeare. I hadn't heard all of her testimony, but I heard her testify. She was a real charmer.
When Dorothy Buell came and knocked on the door, she was dressed with her white hat, her pearls, her matching purse, and she wanted to welcome my mother to the area, and she wanted to get my mother to join Save the Dunes. Dorothy gave her the whole story about why we should save the dunes, not have steel mills on both sides of Ogden Dunes.
I first met Dorothy Buell at the dinner in Miller in 1960, and she was a marvelous public speaker.
She lobbied both the Democratic and Republican conventions one year when they were here in Chicago. And, you know, she was not on anybody's platform, but there she was talking about the dunes.
Back in 1952, area residents and dune lovers began to hear that land was being bought up to develop major steelmaking facilities.
The area we're talking about now was the core of the Indiana Dunes that was still unspoiled. The highest dunes, the area of greatest diversity in both dune formations and in plant life. Most of it was held and owned by a holding company that just held it for speculation purposes. And Midwest Steel owned a part of the area straddling Burns Ditch, but had not built yet. So when our early efforts to create or preserve the Indiana Dunes was directed to that core area, the Indiana politicians, of course, had development in mind. The issues of the building of the steel mills and the issue of building the port were interconnected.
Seeing the threats ever looming and getting little or no help from Indiana politicians intent on turning the rest of the undeveloped Indiana shoreline into an industrial complex, Dorothy Buell decided to enlist the help of Illinois Senator Paul Douglas. Douglas then shouldered dunes preservation through several sessions of Congress.
And really, it's because of Senator Paul Douglas that our park exists in the first place.
The earth movers moved in, and most of the unspoiled areas between Ogden Dunes and Dune Acres were leveled.
At that time, I lived in an old house just north of the railroad tracks and south of the Indiana Dunes State Park, and I could hear the bulldozers going 24 hours a day, day and night. So I heard all of that, and I knew what was going on, and it was heartbreaking.
Save the Dunes Council is seeking 1 million citizens to sign its petitions, asking Congress to create a national monument in the dunes.
The first of many bills to preserve the dunes was introduced in 1958. After many battles in Congress, behind-the-scenes skirmishes with non-dune supporters, 250,000 petition signatures by dunes lovers nationwide, support from influential politicians from the Chicago area, and bus trips by Save the Dunes members to Washington, D.C. to testify before Congress?
Well, we took Frank Dudley's paintings with us on the bus going to Washington. It was really, I don't know how we managed it because they were huge. And we wrapped them up and took them and propped them up in the hearing room of the Senate and House office buildings where the hearings were being held.
And we were very, very enthusiastic and very committed, and our purpose of going to the hearing was to testify, hoping that the Department of Interior's would endorse getting a national park with the Indiana Dunes.
I went from being too shy to talk in class to testify in front of congressional committees. And I was propelled by my purpose was to establish the national park, which seemingly was an impossible task. But we did it.
After the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore was created, Save the Dunes could have decided its work was done. Fortunately, members realized that they had won the battle, but according to Senator Douglas, have not yet won the war. 4 subsequent expansion bills for the park in 1976, 1980, 1986, and the last one being Crescent Dune in 1992, have increased the size of the park to more than 15,000 acres.
The importance of Crescent Dune was the fact that it was the last open stretch of beach that could be acquired, that wasn't going to step on too many people's toes. When Crescent Dune was finally put in the park, I asked the superintendent, Dale Enquist, at the time, did he know when they would take that fence down to make it accessible to people? And he said, well, it would have to be put on a list and it'd happen when it would happen. So I said, well, gee, think we could volunteer to help do that? And he said, well, yeah, that'd be a wonderful idea too. We just clipped the little wires that go around the post, because it was a chain link fence, and then it fell over, and we just pushed it and rolled it up and had a good time.
It's important to note that the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore was established really as a compromise during the Kennedy administration, after decades and decades of conservation, people trying to push against those who are pro-development, and it resulted in a fragmented park in the end. And what that means is we have a national park that has heavy industry, some of the biggest steel mills and the 5th largest refinery in the United States within its area. It also has wealthy communities nestled like islands inside of the park, and a range of different businesses that rely on the park for economic benefits and tourism and so forth. We are seen as a bit of an overseer of a lot of the permits that are issued to those businesses in the region. It's our job to point out and to make sure that permits for air and water releases are protective of the park. And it's very hard when there's a big steel mill right next door to a park to keep things clean enough in a way that would protect it well.
It was several years ago when BP released their application for a permit for expansion of their refinery in Whiting, and it called for more discharges of toxins into the lake. And that was made public, and Save the Dunes, of course, jumped right on that issue.
The other major issue for fragmentation is invasive species. Because of the fragmentation of the park, there are so many different ways that invasive plants, aquatic invasives, can get into the park, and considering how biodiverse the national park is, it's a major concern.
One of Save the Dunes' major initiatives today is its work in improving water quality in the Indiana Dunes and the watershed of Lake Michigan.
Prior to development, Northwest Indiana was a series of wetlands and forested areas and prairies. As we've modified that landscape over time, whether it be clearing the forests for agriculture, or then coming in later and putting residential developments on top of those ag fields, or coming in and introducing industry, all of these different land uses sort of modified the water cycle. You might not think that what you do on the land as a resident impacts the Indiana Dunes, but it really does. All of the water that washes off of all of the land that drains to Lake Michigan really does make its way through the Indiana Dunes and has a critical impact.
You have so many microclimates. Herb talked about the demise of what he calls the Central Dunes. They were very important. That they're gone is an incredible loss. But there are also dune and swale to the west of the Central Dunes that I don't think I certainly had never heard about them at the time. And they're really virtually unknown anywhere else in the world except in this little piece on the south shore of Lake Michigan. And dune and swale is it's not spectacular. It's small ridges and little wetlands in between, but very, very important, very much threatened, and even more lost than some of the other parts of the dunes.
We have to coexist. Neither one is going to get it all, and what's done is done. We can recover what we can of unused lakefront through the Marquette plant, but we have to coexist, work together, strengthen the partnerships, and I think that we've seen a lot of good things recently with steel mills turning over land that they're not using in creative ways. The power companies, NIPSCO, working together with land trusts and other things, and trying to figure out ways to coexist. So I think we'll just have to continue to be creative and compromise a little bit and try to encourage them to come to our side and help.
One thing I've always admired about our founders is once the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore was created, they didn't just stop. They just didn't disband the organization. They saw, because of the compromise that had to be made and because they knew that their work wasn't done, I mean, certain lands were authorized, but that doesn't mean that everything was acquired. They knew that there was still a lot of work to be done. They knew that eternal vigilance was the watchword of the day, and their work was going to continue into many future generations.
Nothing that we did could have been done without all kinds of people who don't get awards, whose names maybe I don't even remember. But it's so important to have people who care.
Because it means the next generation is stepping up, and the next generation, which is highly sophisticated. Many of them have been trained in environmental science.
I help map out both the land that Save the Dunes owns and the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, and help with land acquisition in and around it. I'm also involved in a number of advocacy initiatives on the part of Save the Dunes, working on issues that affect our land, water, air, and all natural resources of the Indiana Dunes.
This generation, I have tremendous faith in.
Wild turkey can.
Dorothy Buell, our founder, said, "We will spend the rest of our lives, if necessary, to protect the dunes." And I love that she made that broad, strong statement. I think it reflects who we are as an organization still today.
Let's work together to save the dunes so that our children and grandchildren will continue to enjoy them in the way that Save the Dunes founders intended when they embarked on their grand effort more than 60 years ago.